Yeah, I'm going to try and share with you a bit of what we've learned over the last 4.5 years now, really, in our games about our players, from as much as possible from a data science point of view. We've obviously learned lots of other stuff as well, but I'll mostly not touch on that today. Quick show of hands, please. Who's played this game? It's almost 75%. There's quite a few of you who haven't. You should play it, but anyway. Most of what I'll talk about will be about this game, but also it's worth. There's a whole kind of portfolio of games that we have, and there's a large part of what we do which really drives off those other games. One of the things that we've found extremely valuable is to kind of take a portfolio view of experimentation in these games. And you obviously want to do lots of experiments that are about optimizing and fine-tuning the game in many different ways. And those kind of small-scale experiments, which are fairly low risk, perhaps, are the kind of things that you're happy to do in a large game like Candy Crush. But there are other experiments that you would love to do, but are perhaps a little bit high risk. There's a chance they might kind of destroy part of the player experience, but you really, really want to do them. Those kind of experiments you're not going to do in Candy Crush, but you maybe do them in one of the other smaller games. And if that works, if you learn what you wanted to, if it seems to be a beneficial thing, you can then take it to the big game. So we very much view this sort of portfolio as something that's very, very beneficial to us, and then we can do the right things in the right place. Just wanted to point out, just a few days ago, 4 of our Swedish founders were put on the Hall of Fame in Arlanda Airport. So if you walk through that terminal, you'll see them there, which they were very excited about. Moving on, so these are the areas I wanted to touch on today, really. A brief word about tech and its importance in it, but then really the rest is all about how we think about experimentation, how we do experimentation, some examples of the things that we've learned, and I'll finish on a note around machine learning and predictive analytics, which obviously many in the data science world are very excited about, and I'll give you our take on that. Just on the sort of scaling and tech side of things, this is taken from Boston Consulting Group, BCG report from last year. Apparently at that time, Candy Crush Saga was the world record holder for the fastest thing to reach 100 million users, which apparently took 1 year and 3 months, according to this report. It's probably been beaten by Pokemon Go recently, I would expect, and I'm sure it'll be beaten many times by lots of things. From our point of view, from a sort of tech point of view, this obviously caused us a lot of challenges. We went extremely fast to from 5 million to 100 million plus users, and it was there were a lot of struggles there, a lot of painful lessons learned, I'm not really going to, we can talk about some of those things afterwards perhaps, but it's really, really essential to have a great, robust, reliable sort of tech stack for your data in order to enable all of the other stuff. And for a long time, we were kind of running to stand still, and that really limited our ability to do all of the things that we wanted to do, which was sort of, very sad. But fortunately, we're a few years later, and we've caught up, and we've got actually some really great tech in place, and we're doing lots of really, really exciting things now. And that's, some of those are what I'm going to be sharing with you. So the first main point really is that we obviously love in the data world at King, we love data and our metrics and all that side of stuff, and it's super important. However, that's only half of the view. And really, to do a good job of experimentation and improving our games, we need to take a kind of binocular view of the world, and care about all that data, but also care about the art of things. And to do that well, we need to really understand our players and our games and the motivations and feelings that our players have in the games. This feeling feelings of mastery and challenge and frustration and those kind of things. And you need to bring that world together with the data-driven scientific world, bring those things together. And when we've brought those two sides together is when we've actually discovered the most important things in our games, and things that have really changed the metrics by substantial amounts, as opposed to the sort of fine-tuned little tuning of parameters and stuff. That doesn't get you very far. So to give you a sort of an example of this, this level here, Candy Crush level 65, is our most famous level. At one point in time, if you Googled Candy Crush level 65, you'd get many millions of hits from people writing about it in all sorts of social channels. Let me share with you one quote from a nice lady called Kay on our fan page that she kindly wrote there. After 2 months at level 65, I finally cleared them all. So excited, I screamed at my hubby to come see. Then it said I failed. I never noticed, besides clearing the board, you needed 150,000 points too. I cried myself to sleep. So, obviously, we're not really in the business of wanting our players to cry themselves to sleep. Something's a bit wrong there. Some other players express themselves in other ways. So, this kind of stuff obviously made us take a particularly close look at level 65, as well as the metrics that we could see very clearly in our data. So around this time, this particular level, the average number of attempts that a player would make on this level before succeeding or just giving up on the game at that stage was around 130. So lovely Kay, with her 2 months of playing, was not particularly unusual. That was quite a common thing. And obviously on this level, there was quite a lot of revenue that came in. However, there was also a huge amount of churn. Around 50% of players who got as far as level 65 in the game actually gave up the game on level 65, which was kind of alarming, really. So, the usual thing, you run some kind of experiment and you observe what happens. And I guess this brings me to my sort of second point, is that there's many dimensions of importance that matter. And not for every experiment do all of these dimensions matter, and you need to develop a feel for your particular product and the way in which your particular customers use your product as to how the different metrics intertwine in different ways in their experience in your product. And so to just give you a feel in this particular example, obviously I've mentioned churn was 50%, so retention's a really big deal there. If we were to make this level easier, retention presumably will go up. It'll certainly go up in the short term because a lot more people will get through this level pretty quickly. However, does that lead to a long-term improvement in retention, or are those same people just going to drop out in another 5 or 10 levels? So those are the kind of things that's really important to measure. Lots of things may change short-term but not long-term. Virality, you could imagine that going in two different directions. On the one hand, there's millions and millions of people sort of talking about and writing about this level. So if we make it easier, maybe that's going to kind of vanish. But on the other hand, if more people end up playing the game for longer, maybe the aggregate virality in total of people talking about it might be higher. So it's a hard call on that one. Conversion, which is for us people beginning to spend money for the very first time in the game. Level 65 was indeed, unsurprisingly, quite a big driver of that. That will go down if we make the level easier. However, again, in the long run, is it actually going to stay down, or will it recover over the future levels of the game? Candy Crush Saga, we just a week or two ago released its 2000th level. So there's a lot of content in the game, and there's many, many millions of people who have played all 2,000 plus levels. If we're going to worry too much about short-term effects of conversion, we're probably doing the wrong thing. Monetization, really there, the key thing is always look at the long term. Really it's the long-term, in our case, long-term customer lifetime value that we care about, and we have no interest in how much money a particular level makes. So in some sense, that's just that's something you can ignore, but it's the long-term picture that matters in this test. And engagement's a really interesting one. So engagement for us is about the intensity with which people are using our games. How many minutes a day, how many days a week, those kind of things. And we've found over the years that actually those are the dimensions which are, in some sense, least obviously related to the things that you care about, to the high-level metrics of kind of long-term retention, long-term monetization. How does engagement fit into that? Actually, we found that the things that impact engagement, the experiments, the features that we change in the game that best impact engagement, those are the ones which actually have the biggest long-term impact. So it's but otherwise it's quite a subtle. What is the influence of engagement on these other things? It's quite hard to determine in a sort of theoretical way, but it's a really, really strong driver in everything that we do. So, to cut a long story short, indeed, it's much better making level 65 easier. And in fact, we have, over time, repeatedly gone back to level 65 and other levels in our games and made them progressively easier over time. And so this level's been changed probably about 4 or 5 times now in those last 4 years. Moving on to the next topic quickly. So there's now 3 different games in the Candy Crush franchise. What I want to do is and there's all sorts of interesting things that we try to understand actually in this area of how to understand how our players deal with these 3 different games, how many of them play multiple games, stick with one, or just migrate entirely to another. And there's lots of things that are strategically very important to the business. But I'm going to gloss over all of those and take you to a second really important point, which is about the details of the metrics that you care about. So, retention, super important. And here's an example of some of the subtleties that you run into, though. So these are the first 60 levels of Candy Crush Soda Saga. So the second game in the Candy Crush franchise that was released nearly 2 years ago now. We spent close to 6 months in the development period of that game, playtesting those first, particularly the first 30 levels, but also the first 60. Lots and lots of iterations of those levels. Getting new people to play the game. We put the game live in a small country and get a few thousand people into the game. Iterating to improve that onboarding flow. There's no real tutorial in our games, so those first levels kind of are the tutorial, how you learn the game. We're trying to maximize, in particular, retention over that early stage. And quite a long way into that 6-month period, we had a level progression that we're all pretty happy with. And then there was we returned to this idea of that maybe we should, which we tried earlier but it kind of failed, of that we should introduce more difficulty in those levels. That there'll be a lot of players coming to the game who'd already played the original Candy Crush, and they'd need the right level of challenge for them really to want to play this second game. And previously we tried kind of increasing the spikes of difficulty. And this time we felt we'd just kind of raise the bar a bit across the board in difficulty. And so we tried that and put a few different variations of that theme live for a bunch of players. And immediately we unfortunately saw that second-day retention went down. So, of the people who installed the game today, the number who come back and play the game again tomorrow, that number went down. And that's obviously a pretty bad sign. But when we've launched a test, we always kind of leave things running. Unless something's disastrously wrong, we'll leave things running for longer so we can learn things from it. And as the days ticked by, actually we saw that the retention was, the difference in retention between control and these various test groups was actually converging. And after about 7 days, they were equal. And 14 days out, actually, these various test groups, all 3 of them were actually better in retention than the control group. So even though second-day retention was worse, 14-day retention and beyond was better. And we scratched our heads for a bit around, what's the explanation for this? It's obviously great, that's what we want, long-term retention. But why is it happening? And we realized that the sort of fundamental problem there is that second-day retention is actually not a very good metric. It's a metric that is partially driven or significantly driven by lots and lots of people who are never really going to become your core customers who stick with the game for a long time. And so, yes, by the game being easier, more of these people, played it for a few days. It was kind of fun, get through a few levels, but then, they were going to drop out anyway. And by making the levels harder, indeed, we discouraged those people more quickly, so secondary retention went down, but the game was much better for everyone else who was actually the target audience that we were aiming for. So the lesson here really is make sure that you understand which of your metrics really reflects what you care about, your true customer base, as opposed to which of your metrics can be biased by other sorts of things that are not representative of your true customer base. A/B testing in general is super important, and there's just tons that we've learned about it. I really enjoyed Boxen's talk earlier from Spotify about the things that they're doing there with A/B testing, which is really good stuff, and I really echo a lot of what he had to say there. There's data is always very, very skewed, and looking at averages in A/B tests is dangerous and doesn't teach you that much. And so we've really found that you need to dig a level deeper and really understand what's happening to the different players and trying to understand the ways in which players have changed their behavior through an A/B test, and that tells you much more about what's going on. Of course, an even more important thing is to make sure that you do A/B tests in the first place in a good way. And for some time, we struggled with that at King. So for those of you who are in maybe smaller organizations or large ones who are sort of trying to make a kind of data-driven transition and view your product in a more data-driven way, maybe this will give you some comfort that we've struggled with these things a lot. So this is a feature called Mystery Quest we introduced into Candy Crush Saga a few years ago now. And it's a way of unlocking more levels in the game. You could play these 3 mystery quests and you'd unlock more content, which otherwise you had to use other mechanisms to do, which some players didn't want. So it was sort of, great idea. This will help our players. Unfortunately, we actually don't know if it's any good because we decided to put it live without A/B testing it. And so, to this day, we don't really know if it's any good. It means none of our other games have ever picked up this feature and implemented it because, there's never a shortage of good ideas for what people want to do. And so, if you come along with, hey, do Mystery Quest, and they say, oh, yeah, that's in Candy. How did it do? And you go, don't know how it did. It gets chucked in the bin, and the ideas that we do know more about, that we have measured, are the ones near the top of the pile. So we've obviously learned since then, and we make sure we do A/B test stuff, but we still run into problems. Although interestingly, sometimes sometimes even when things go wrong, we still learn quite a lot from them. There was an example recently in one of our games where we'd done something similar to what I described on level 65, but we'd got things wrong and made a whole bunch of levels harder, which just wasn't supposed to be what was going to happen at all. And we used that opportunity. We realized fairly quickly, but not immediately. So we had a couple of weeks of data, and we used that to try and understand, okay, what does making this whole portion of the game harder do to different kinds of players? And we actually learned some quite valuable stuff from it. So take advantage of those things. Actually, I'll come back to that in a moment. And a different example of that, which is great, is sometimes you get accidental experiments. And in this particular case, we came across this because our games are available on both Facebook's platform and the mobile platforms. And those are 2 different code bases in the majority of cases, because some years ago, HTML5 wasn't really performant on most people's machines. So we've got a Flash-based implementation for running on Facebook and a C++ implementation for running on all the mobile platforms. And those code bases, some of the logic within the game of how the candies fall down and all that kind of stuff is quite subtle. So those code bases are subtly different, and it means the game is subtly different. And we actually see in the metrics of the game that a particular level might be a little bit harder or easier on one platform versus the other. Anyway, we noticed that there were various systematic differences, and a bit of analysis sort of suggested that the way things were working on one platform was possibly better than the other. So we took what we understood about that and applied it into the other platform, running a proper A/B test. So we actually modified the very core mechanics of the game, how the candies fall down, and it was changed so that it was more likely, just by chance, as the candies fell down, that you would get these sorts of special power-up candies appearing just randomly. And so for those of you who played the game, these are the things that really help you in the game. And so it was fairly simple A/B test, the original versus the game where these things happened more often. And not too surprisingly, if you've got more of this stuff happening, it makes the game easier. Make the game easier. All the levels, by and large, are going to become a bit easier. And you might expect that might be beneficial for retention, probably bad for monetization and conversion and those sorts of things. So, sounds like a pretty dangerous idea. Actually, every single metric went up. And this is where the fun word comes in. So yes, it made the game easier, but people were having much more fun because there was all of these cool combinations they could make use of more often, and that fun trumped everything else. And actually, the sort of revenue, the money that people spend in the game is largely driven not really by difficulty and frustration and stuff like that. It's driven by the fun they're having. And the more, if you can find ways, which is, there's no recipe for it, unfortunately, else we do it way more often. But if you can find ways to make the game a bit more fun, that sort of trumps everything else. And so it's a really nice case. So we've only had sort of 2 or 3 of these cases in the last 4 years, unfortunately, where you can find a way to just genuinely make something more fun, and it really improves all of the metrics. So fantastic things. I just wanted to 3 rules of thumb that we've learned over the years. So I think the first one there has been mentioned a few times today. I think really start with a hypothesis. A good A/B test is not, hey, is this feature better than that feature? That's a bad A/B test. A good A/B test is, I think I understand this thing about how our players or our customers behave, and if we change this experience for them, I think they're going to react in this way, and this will be good, this might not be good. So start with that, an understanding of how you intend to change your customers' behavior in some very particular way. Where do those come from? The best ones we find come from collaboration between lots of different people. So all the different perspectives that the different parts of the team have, from graphic designers and artists and data scientists and producers and business performance managers, all of those perspectives coming together, the best ideas come out of that sort of mishmash of perspectives. And then obviously the last point, make sure you're tracking the right data. Can be hard. We certainly used to struggle a lot in just getting the right data. We're better at it now, but still not perfect. And of course, the right analysis. So this is on to the last point then. We've got a lot of players, which is fantastic. And that means there's tremendous diversity amongst that player base. And that's, gives us loads and loads of opportunity to do all sorts of, machine learning, predictive analytics, all sorts of cool questions of things we might want to try and predict. Long list of stuff here. The most obvious one at the top there, is this player going to stop playing? The churn prediction one that one hears about so often, but also other kinds of predictive problems there. And how important is this stuff? How valuable is it? And I would say more often than not, they're not really that valuable. Because most things fail this sort of simple test. So let me take you through a sort of typical churn prediction example as it runs through this. So first of all, to have a good predictive model, it needs to be an accurate model. So you build your nice churn prediction model, you get a whole bunch of data, and you slice it in two, well, you retain a bit for the sample for validation, and then you've got the rest of the data, you slice it in two and say, okay, I'm going to use this data here from the past to predict what the players are going to do in the future. And so this is my training set, and then I'll validate on the other bit data that I've kept. So I train up my models using my latest, greatest, cool techniques, and I've got my churn prediction, and it's fantastically accurate. And then I look inside the model as best I can, depending on how black boxy it is, at what's going on. And I realize, actually, oh, that's not very good, because what it actually says is, if I look in the historic data, it's telling me that, if I've got, say, a month of historic data that I'm using to predict the churn on, it's saying players who played on the first day of that month and didn't play for the rest of the following 29 days, those are the ones who are going to churn. And it's like, well, that's not a prediction. That's just reality. They're gone. So, okay, my model's no good. I need to reformulate it, and I need to actually, restructure my data so that people have actually played. Sort of. What I really want to know is, the player is playing today. Are they going to be coming back in the future? Or something similar to that. And that's a much harder predictive problem. So then the accuracy of your model plummets. But let's say you've solved that, and you've still got a model that predicts reasonably well. So you're optimistic. So then the question is, okay, actionable. Well, can I act upon it? So the player's in the game right now. If they are, then okay, great. I can do something. I've got maybe one opportunity to act, or maybe they'll come back another once or so. So maybe I've got another opportunity. So I've got some small window of opportunity in which I can act upon them, but it's pretty small. But there's a chance there. That's great. And now, okay, what actions am I going to take? Well, here's a player who, they're about to disappear. What can I do that's actually going to change it around? I mean, the standard sort of thing that companies do with churn is they'll offer a discount on your next year's subscription or something. Well, that doesn't really apply in our world, and I'm not sure it's the most fantastic model in other worlds anyway. So you're a bit kind of stuck there. There's not really that much you can do at that stage, and so really you're then at a stage, but even so, let's say you find something you can do. Maybe you'll give them a little gift. Say, hey, here's this nice gift that'll encourage you to keep playing a bit more. And that's the third issue. Is it actually effective? Does it impact their behavior in any way, in any meaningful way? And the answer is more often than not really, or at least it's tiny. So when we compare at King, the effectiveness, the value of this whole stuff, which is pretty complicated and difficult and a lot of work, and the business benefits we get out of it are tiny compared with applying that same amount of work to doing good experimentation, good analysis, understanding the players, and doing much simpler things. So rather than doing this clever prediction based upon tons of data that someone's going to disappear, maybe just observe a simpler thing that, hey, they used to play every day and now they play 2 times a week. Well, they're probably on their way out. They're still playing 2 times a week, so that's great. I've got lots of opportunity to do stuff over the next few weeks. I don't need a fancy churn prediction algorithm to tell me that, though. I need something much simpler. So it's rare that we get great benefits out of this, but we still do all of this, but it's just, this is a small percentage of what we do compared to all the other stuff. So a quick wrap up of the lessons from that great run through. It's really important to have good systems that scale and work and are fast, and the faster you can get those analytic systems, the much easier your life is, and we really struggled with that. And so if you are in a fortunate position to be scaling quickly, get ahead of that curve as fast as you can. Look at lots of metrics and think really deeply about the player. Some of your metrics won't matter that much, or are distracting or distorted. Make sure you understand the difference between the metrics that really represent your core player base and those that don't. Lots of great experiments. More often than not, our intuitions are wrong. in our world at least. So, you've got the greatest idea, you get it goes live in a game, and it's the most disappointing thing ever. And someone else has some idea that you just think, what? That's just daft. And they put it in the game, and it's fantastic. So our intuitions are wrong, and you've just got to iterate and find ways to test things quickly. Exploit accidents, they happen surprisingly often, so exploit them where possible. And certainly, what I maybe didn't stress very much, understanding the diversity of our customer base we feel is super important. There's lots of work we do there, but the prediction side of things is much, much less important. And with that, I'll wrap up.
Fantastic.
Thank you.